husband's doing.
5 seconds. Hello, and welcome to the YSU Alumni and Friends Virtual Book Club. We're so glad you decided to read I Am Malala along with us. My name is Andrea, and I work at the Austin Town Library, and I also graduated from YSU in 2012 with a degree in English literature. Dr. Jackson, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good evening. My name is Dr. Krishana A. Jackson-Leftwich, and I am an associate professor at Youngstown State University in politics and international relations. I'm also the director of women and gender studies, and I would like to pass it to my colleague, Dr. Felbaum.
Hi, I'm Dr. Amanda Felbaum, and I am a professor in the Department of Sociology, and I'm an affiliate faculty for Women's and Gender Studies, and I'm happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Bridget. I work at the Tri-Lakes Library, and I'm also a YSU graduate. I graduated in 2019 with my master's in fine arts. And then we have Star, finally.
Hi, I'm Star Jones. I'm a librarian at the Austin Library, and I'm glad to be here to talk about I Am Malala. The book follows the story of Malala Yousafzai, and she is a Pakistani female. It follows her life from her birth to her teen years. She was born in Pakistan in 1997 in an area called the Swat Valley. Her father is a teacher and ran schools and owned different schools throughout her life. He instills in his daughter a confidence and the importance of education for all, especially for girls. But then when she gets a little older, the Taliban tries to take control of her area in Pakistan. But both her father and Malala continue to speak out for education for boys and for girls. In 2012, when she was 15, Malala was riding a bus home from school when a couple of men stop her school bus, 2 Taliban soldiers, and one of them comes in the back of the bus and shoots Malala in the head point blank. The book follows the story of what happens after she is attacked. Thankfully, she does not die right away. She gets sent to the hospital where they do some surgery. When she gets hit, there is a British doctor or 2 that were there for some other reason, and they insist that her best chance to live is to get taken to England. So she gets taken to Birmingham, England, where they treat her, and she begins some rehabilitation on her face and her walking and all that stuff. Her family joins her in England, where they still live there today. They are unable to return to Pakistan because there's threats on her life as we speak. Malala and her father continue to speak out, and they formed an organization called the Malala Fund, which helps fund and work with local and international leaders to educate and empower girls throughout the world. Malala won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2014 at the age of 17. And that is her story.
Andrea, do you want to start with your regular book club question?
Yes, I wanted to know who liked the book and who didn't like the book, if anybody.
I liked the book. I thought that it was slow in a few parts, but overall, I thought it was very interesting. I learned a lot about Pakistani culture that I didn't know before, and I thought that was very valuable. But things really got going once she was getting older, and you could see that transformation.
I also enjoyed the book. I thought it started out a little slow, but I really enjoyed learning more about the different culture. I don't think I was aware how much the Taliban kind of took over Pakistan to the point where they had to relocate, and how influential they were in terms of with that government and how people kind of feared them. I really enjoyed learning. So it was very interesting. And then just reading about her journey and her love for education and what she was willing to do and how hard she was going to fight to get that education. And I also really liked how her father was just always supportive, even when she was born and she was not a boy. And he said, we're still going to throw rice. We're still going to celebrate. I thought that made me smile.
Dr. Jackson, I agree that it did start out slow, but it occurred to me while reading it that to write a memoir when you're 17 or 18 years old, if I had written a memoir at that age, it would be very, very short.
Yeah.
It wasn't that interesting. Most teenagers aren't. So she's not writing so much about life experience, but about all the influences outside of it. And I think the point about her father is also really well taken. He's written a book called Let Her Fly, which I actually read first, and I'm not sure, I'd read it like last year because I like the title, but it helped inform my understanding of what is going on in Pashtun culture and why are things the way they are and why he kind of went against the masculine culture of the area. So I appreciated that.
We have some comments on Facebook already. Kimberly said that she liked what she read about halfway through, that the information about Pakistan is a lot to digest. I think that's probably why a lot of us maybe felt the beginning was slow, but if you think about not having that background knowledge and how crucial it was to the story, it's almost like you kind of had to get through all of that to kind of even put everything in context.
Right. I would have had a lot of trouble understanding some of the decisions they make if she didn't give us the background like that. So I actually enjoyed the first part of it, but I also listened to it as an audiobook, which I think made it go a lot quicker than if I were reading it. So that helped.
It did tie in. And I think when she started off with her being shot and then given the background, I was like, no way, like you can't leave with this and then take me back. Like I want to know what happens. But you're absolutely right. Just kind of hearing the history and where women's place was, and her mother, I had to actually look up when she kept referring to her mother living in Purda, and I was like, what is that? How she lived her life, and that made everything kind of make a lot of sense in terms of the decisions that they made, and why this was so important to her.
Yeah, I was grateful. I don't know if everybody had a glossary at the back, because I found that very helpful. And it's not very often that I read books with glossaries anymore. It felt like that was the go-to in YA fantasy back in the day. And just as necessary now. Sorry, I have a visitor.
Barbara on Facebook says that the fact that at 15 you're considered an adult, that the culture seemed to support her maturity at that age, which probably is true. A lot of some countries at 15 that, people probably are close to getting married and that kind of stuff. So they might look at a 15-year-old differently than maybe we do here.
Definitely. I agree with that. And I believe Malala even mentions she had to, at 15, be treated as more of a mature person. So she couldn't do the things like playing in the water and whatnot that she did with her friends like she did when she was younger.
It almost seems to force growing up upon them earlier, which I don't know, I guess in that case is a good thing for her because she's able to handle things a little differently with a different attitude.
There was the reference in the book in which she was talking about why her mother didn't finish her education, because at that time women were kind of seen, what's the point of getting this education when you're just going to be in the house cooking and taking care of your husband, and you're expected to do certain duties. You couldn't leave the house without a male relative. And so just certain aspects of it that you kind of grow up, but when you're seen as a woman, you're really limited on the things that you can do and the activities that you can do in that society.
Yeah, you're a second-class citizen.
Yeah.
Which to me is strange, because Malala even mentions that her mother had parental support especially from her father, that she could have gone to school. And then Malala's father probably wanted his wife to learn things, but society in general is just so overwhelming and so overpowering. It's not for everybody to be able to stand up to it, even in small personal ways.
Well, toward the end, she was going
Right.
to be educated in English. She was going to learn words when Malala was shot. So eventually, even they convinced her to, forward herself, even though she thought education was important already. She'd never done it on her own. And
I think we see that too when she finally allowed herself to be photographed, because that was
Mhm.
another recurring kind of theme in the book, was that her mom did not want to be photographed. That was going to be violating PERDA. And then I think following her daughter's example and realizing the small things you can do that make a big effect probably helped.
Exactly.
Well, I found it interesting, some of the struggles that her father had in terms of education, in terms of not being able to afford to go to college, and he wanted to stay with his relatives, and he was unable to go, and he had that stuttering problem, and
Mhm.
was like, I'm going to give this speech, and he did so well. And then Malala said, I was one of the only females that entered that speech competition, but I was determined to win that competition and follow in the footsteps of my father. So even her father, as a male, he had his struggles in education, but he really valued and stuck with it so that he could better himself. And I think that is some of the reasons that he instilled that into Malala.
I think too, she had an amazing headmistress as well that
Yeah.
I thought was really interesting to learn about her in a more in-depth way. Do you also have a visitor?
Well, she's starting to whine in her crate, in her
Mm.
like I'm downstairs, a crate is next to me, and she's starting to whine. So no.
So I wanted to know, as long as we're still chatting about this, there are several pop culture references that Malala makes that I wanted to know what everybody thought about, these touchstones that we're probably familiar with. Do you have any of those things in common, and why? Or what did you think of them when she mentioned them?
Well, I'm not a fan of Twilight, but I thought it was interesting that Twilight, which is, written by, I want to say, a Mormon woman, is,
Yes.
somewhat chaste and all that other stuff, is, so huge in that culture, or just among her friends. But, being in, I'm reminded of Chichamanda, I forget her last name, but she talks about the danger of a single story, or the power of a single story, where it's like, do you even listen to cassette tapes? And me just like not thinking that Twilight would have gotten all the way to Pakistan, but of course it would have.
Mhm.
So yeah, just touching on those soldiers. I mean, the milestones like Romeo and Juliet was like, okay, yeah, but Twilight, I was just like, what?
It made me laugh when she talked about it, like so often. It wasn't even one instance, it was multiple that she talked about it. But to me, that makes perfect sense that she would enjoy a love story that was written by a Mormon woman. And it is a very modest love story. So out of all of the ones that were happening at that time, it seems like that would make sense that they would cling to that one.
To me, it was an interesting reminder that Malala is much younger than I am and much more accomplished at the same time, because
Yeah.
I was too old to really get into Twilight. I tried. I got to where the vampires were playing baseball and driving their Volvos all over the place, and I was like, I can't anymore.
I was a senior in high school in 2008. So, Twilight fever was kind of rampant at the time. And I was like, no. But I get it because I was there.
It's weird. I didn't even think about the choice of pop culture references in a way. It just, to me, was a reminder of, here she is, this teenage girl doing all these things and standing up to all these people and kind of being fearless, but yet the pop culture references reminded me that she is still just a teenage girl. So I didn't even really think about the choice of what it was. It just that she had them at all. Because in every other way, she was so mature and, like you said, thought of as an adult, but yet she likes, the same things that any teen does.
Right.
It
made me think I need to go back and watch Ugly Betty, because I was like, how long ago was that show out? Like, I don't even know if I remember Ugly Betty like that.
Yeah, I remember Ugly Betty, and I was just thinking, it is a very much a story that would appeal to a girl like Malala, I would think, in terms of being somewhat of an outcast, yet wanting to speak your mind and make a difference in the world.
Yeah, it came out in 2006 and ran until 2010.
See,
I remember I really enjoyed what I've seen of Ugly Betty, but I think it does hit on the same themes. And I think it also, I think she said it jogged her interest in journalism as well, which journalism was what really started Malala on the path she's on now, where she's reaching out and telling everybody in the world what's going on in this tiny corner and how it's affecting normal people. And she learned kind of through pop culture what the power of a story could do. So you worry about the danger of a single story, but also you get to see the power of that story on the flip side.
absolutely.
I did think it was interesting. I mean, not interesting, I guess expected, but she was speaking out before she was shot. And I had never heard of any of that going on up until, after that, when it was a big deal because of what had happened. And it kind of makes me sad, like something tragic had to happen for people to actually take something seriously. And even at that, we can't really do anything about it.
Yeah, I wonder how much that has to do with it having been, I want to say, a BBC production as opposed to something created by, I don't know, more ABC News or something like that.
Right.
I found it interesting from just the political science, international relations perspective on her take on American involvement with Pakistan,
Yes.
Taliban, and how they viewed us coming in there to try to create this democracy, and how it seemed like we were working with from our perspective, working with the Pakistan army. And she's like, no, not really. Like the US is just coming over here and making decisions and doing things without our knowledge. The CIA that shot, and they were like, they paid all this hush money. I'm like, what? Got me getting.
I think she even says at one point that it seems like American presidents like to get along with our dictators more than they do our presidents, or something like that. And I was like, oh, that hit somewhere.
Yeah.
What she said about the money that we gave to Pakistan or to the Taliban, like who we were actually dealing with, I was like, she has some like really valid points. But it's really interesting to hear it. We hear it from an American perspective, but to hear it from somebody else's perspective, it was really interesting.
Right.
I realized how little I knew about internal Pakistani politics, as well as our foreign policy and our foreign actions abroad. It's eye-opening, to say the least.
Yeah, it's amazing the things that you think you have a grasp on and then really you weren't paying attention to. And it just shows that you really need to go out and seek information sometimes so that we have, the right perspective, I guess.
I also think it's a good reminder that there is a huge distinction between devout Muslims and the Taliban. And I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with Islam don't understand that distinction at all. And I think that the way that the regular Muslims who are devout and go about their lives illustrate, what they stand for and how they live, and what a stark contrast that is to the extreme Taliban people.
Right. I mean, it would be like judging all of Christianity based on what Westboro Baptist Church does, which you wouldn't want to do that. So trying to judge all of Muslims based on what the actions of the Taliban is equally wrong. I was, one of the things I was surprised by in terms of the Taliban was just how they were able to change the environment so much in terms of taking down all those trees, and then the repercussions of the massive flooding that happened afterward. It's like, that didn't occur to me. I mean, I knew floods happened and I knew an earthquake happened, but much like Malala mentioned, like people come in and then they leave and we're left with to deal with the aftermath basically by ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And she was pointing out, like, even with the point about the Taliban, like, she's like, those aren't the teachings of the Quran. Like, the Quran says everybody should be educated. So denying women the right for education or trying to make them wear the burqas in certain areas, she's like, those are not the teachings of the Quran. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the Taliban was this extremist group. And I've made a few parallels. Maybe I shouldn't because it's debate and I don't want to get into politics. I'm a political scientist. To allowing somebody or some groups is to come in and kind of take over your government. And I think we have to be very careful as Americans that we can't allow one person to come in and overrun the democracy and fear monger. Because what happened was there were people in the Pakistan who didn't agree with the Taliban, but joined them because they were afraid that the Pakistani government could not protect them,
Mm-hmm.
and that they would have more protection being in the Taliban. And they let fear dictate and decide, and that's what gave this group power. And I think, you know, for any country that's a democracy, there can be a threat to democracy if you allow anybody to come in and not follow the rules of the democracy, not go through the laws and order. You know, it could put us all in jeopardy of fear, and then people out of fear do the wrong thing.
I thought, and that fascinating the way that it happened as well, because
Right.
I mean, we have social media, we have Facebook, we have Twitter. They may have it now, but they didn't have access to it then. So when somebody decided to close their DVD shop because the Taliban was threatening them, they would take out an ad in the paper that said, "Hey, I've closed my DVD shop. Just, hey, I'm going to be a devout Muslim from now on, like the Taliban wants me to be. So please don't shoot me."
Yeah, it was
Because-
interesting how much they were able to use religion to control people, because like she said at the start, they seem like very good guys. They came in, they were teaching the Quran, they were, you know, just preaching essentially. And for them, that was perfectly fine. And people started to respect them. And then they started slowly twisting what they were saying to make it what they wanted it to be. And it's just amazing how much you can dictate what someone does based on the religion that you are pushing at them, I guess, because they believe it. So they're like, well, I guess this is the right way to interpret it.
Right.
Was it really, or was it more fear?
Well, I mean, I think it's a combination of both, because the things I should say, I don't know. But religion and fear sometimes go hand in hand, because they're saying, you know, well, you're not going to get into heaven if you let these girls go to school. You're not, you know, you're going to hell, you know, in the Christian sense. Like, what is that but religion and fear controlling a person? So,
well, in fear, in the sense that the Taliban were overly committed, right? So like they had suicide bombers. So are you that dedicated? I remember when we first were talking about like having a war on terror, I said, you know, we have people in our military that want to come home. So putting them up against people who are willing to be a hero, for a martyr for their country, you're
right.
going to lose that every time. Like if they're willing to just strap a bomb to their chest and run through a school, that's a lot of commitment to that cause.
I found it was interesting that when that guy first started preaching through the town, how he kind of got in good with everybody as he talked directly to the women. And she makes a comment that, you know, not everybody comes and talks to the women, and how they're at home and they're kind of separate. And with these women who are at home, who didn't get an education, who don't really go out and don't discuss things like this with other people, and then here's this guy coming in and is saying, "Hey, I'm talking to you directly, you women, I'm talking to you," and kind of strokes their egos and gives them attention. And then slowly says, you know, if you get your name mentioned by this guy, then that's great. You know, they're so excited. And like you said, part of that, is it because they were isolated, or is it because a lot of those women weren't educated at all? And so they didn't have the knowledge and the background to see what was going on, maybe until it was too late. If you don't educate the girls or even the boys and don't let people go to school, it's so much easier to control people because they don't know.
Right. How can you interpret something for yourself if you're not if you can't read. If you can't read, then how are you supposed to make a decision for yourself?
So stopping education for everybody is perpetuating the power that you have over them.
Yes, because then they make the decisions. And if I can't read it, I'll just read it to you, interpret it for you.
And I see that problem a lot with people around me nowadays, when people just read the headline and then the comments, whether it's something that appears on Facebook or Reddit or Twitter, you're not reading the actual content. You're relying on someone else to perform that analysis for you. You're finding out what other people think before you've even given yourself a chance to think about it.
Or taking a meme seriously and not either taking the time to do the investigation behind it, or just not knowing what sources to go to double check things, and just being like, oh, well, I read it on the internet, therefore it must be true. It's like, no, that doesn't really work. You need to check it a couple of different times.
It's challenging for us because, people I know, my peers, people I might admire and respect, they don't have the same sorts of challenges that Malala and her family and friends face. But you still see it happen, that people get isolated and they don't get educated, and they kind of fall into these patterns of thinking, of letting other people do the heavy lifting of critical thinking for them. And whether or not that's something they can recognize and change, or whether it was something they were never educated to do in the first place, it's sometimes infuriating. But to see that it's happening, they're actively suppressing that and working for that in the Swat Valley during Malala's childhood and adolescence is another kind of infuriating.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the whole internet issue where people are sharing stuff that they aren't looking at, and looking at the doing research on it, that's the reason we have conspiracy theories running so rampant. Well, Malala even says that conspiracy theories over there, are everywhere. Everything that happened, even the fact that she got shot, was debated, and they said her dad shot her and was faking it all just to get out of the country. They said that she wasn't actually shot and she was just making a fuss. And it's just interesting because that education and conspiracy theories, like, they go hand in hand. If you're not looking into things, you're going to have more conspiracy theories.
Exactly.
Yeah. Even
So
Osama bin Laden, when they said that the U.S. had left his body over there for years, and then they came in and found him. But
right. There were a bunch of them that they had mentioned.
Yeah, but when she was saying, like, she was like, he's been living in our village for 10 years. He was sending his kids to our school. Like, he was just under our nose, and nobody was, aware of anything. Well, it's kind of interesting.
But at the same time the time period that he was there, that was the same time that the Taliban was around, right? So maybe people weren't paying attention, but the fact that the government didn't know, I mean, come on.
Well, I think she kind of implies that she doesn't feel it's that plausible that nobody knew he was there.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's how I took it.
She was saying it was kind of embarrassing that, and if they didn't know, what does that say about their government?
Right.
Under their nose this whole time.
So Dr. Jackson and Dr. Feldbaum, this question's for you too. If, I know Malala is a student, I believe at Oxford in England right now, but if she was
I
a
believe
student.
she just graduated.
Oh, did she?
She
Good job.
did.
In June.
All right. So she didn't have to deal with the Zoom online classes as much, probably.
She said she was very disappointed that she couldn't do her graduation ceremony.
All right. Well, if she had been a student at YSU in one of your classes, or if she had been your student advisee or something like that, what do you think she would major in, and what do you think she would get the most out of her time at YSU? What would you push her towards, you think?
Politics.
I mean, I would like to say sociology, of course, but I imagine it would probably be something like political and international relations. But I just reading about her being so competitive with her classmates, it reminded me of the crap that my friends and I did in high school. And it, what'd you get? And it's like, I think I would struggle with her in terms of trying to get her to not sweat the small stuff and not be, like you don't have to get every single thing right. That would be more the concern I would have. I mean, I would love to have her as a student, but I think being so type A would be, I think she'd be the type to perhaps email me about a typo in my syllabus. And I don't know about a typo in my syllabus. It's just there. So I think I would probably steer her toward Dr. Jackson to be like, here you go, student. She's interested in stuff you teach. So
then what would you do with her, Dr. Jackson? Oh, she might have frozen. That's all right. We'll leave that as an enduring mystery.
Yes.
For now. We'll get her back.
Yeah.
Are there any Facebook questions, Star?
There
Sorry.
was some comments about, Barbara commented about Malala's father says that he's all for women's rights, but she thought it was interesting that he never even helped the mother put away the teacups.
I think that's a marital problem for a lot of folks.
I think that's true too. My computer froze up there a little bit. Sorry, I'm back.
All right, Dr. Jackson, I'm going to ask you again then, now that you're here. What would you do if Malala was your student or your advisee?
I would push her towards, of course, politics and international relations, but mostly I would push her towards moot court, because with her competitive nature and her ability to write speeches and her love for policy, like when she spoke at the embassy, I think going into moot court and model United Nations would just be right up her alley.
And if I'm not mistaken, YSU's got an excellent moot court, right?
They're nationally ranked. We have a nationally ranked moot court team. And so I think that would be something to kind of take her focus off of some of that, get her competitive spirit. I think I would also encourage her to do some study abroad to some different areas. I mean, I know she'd be an international student. And, as women in gender studies and affiliated faculty with Dr. Feldbaum, I think taking some courses about some of the struggles that women have over here and the parallels. I think what we tend to do is, as a society, is we all have our struggles. And so sometimes we're dismissive to other people's struggles that we don't relate to. Like, oh, well, that's not my struggle. Or, you're struggling with this, but my struggle is this. But we have more in common than we have difference. And so I think that having that conversation and allowing people to kind of understand that we can really come together, and yes, we all have our struggles and those make us better and those make us great, and how we can really push forward. But I mean, if we had a student like Malala, we'd probably get her in the honors college. We might get another Fulbright scholar, who knows?
Yeah. Ethics bowl, probably.
Ethics, all of them.
So Malala, you're very welcome at YSU.
Yeah.
We'll find a place for you if you want to go. Grad school is always an option, right?
Yeah.
I like to think that she is watching this. So, although I bet it would be pretty frustrating to watch a book club discussion about something you wrote. I think that would probably be really anxiety inducing.
Yeah.
What I found interesting is the importance that they place there on public speaking and oration, which I don't think we have that here at all like they do there.
I think it has to do with literacy, to be honest. You can speak to a lot more people than can read your work. And and even though we have literacy here, like most people I know can read, a lot of people don't want to. So I feel like speeches can go pretty far.
That's true.
It's a very effective tool, but it's also very difficult to do well. So you can always revise what you've written. You can't revise after you've spoken as well. So that's why she would be good at moot court.
Yeah.
I found it very interesting that she gets approached by the BBC, or well, somebody does, and they recommend her to do her online diary, which of course brings the parallels with Anne Frank, which It's sort of a similar story, but different in the fact that Malala is very much an advocate and sticks her nose out where obviously Anne Frank doesn't have any choice and just hides. But it is an interesting correlation that somebody there decided it would be a good idea to sort of create a diary of someone living through this to make it maybe more personable, to get the message out of what was going on to the rest of the world in an understandable, digestible way for, let's say, the people here in America or England or, outside of that area.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just thinking about it. How often do we really take young girls or, teenage girls' stories seriously? How often do they get to serve as advocates for their own education or their lives in general? We generally dismiss adolescent girls and their thoughts and feelings. It's just fluff. But I mean, I don't know that I would have been a good advocate for what I believed in as a teenager, but that was placing a lot of faith in what she did. And I don't know that there's anyone else doing a similar thing, though I would be interested to know, the story of a teenage girl facing any sort of adversity like that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. What do you think, like if we compared Malala to Greta Thunberg, the climate activist? Yes, I can't, whatever. But what do you think if we compared the two of them? Because I guess I don't know enough, how much from us, like how much flack has Malala gotten for doing what she is doing? Whereas with Greta, I feel like people attack her constantly. Like, what is the difference between those two, I guess?
I have a theory.
I have a theory.
I want to hear it.
In the Western world, we take education for granted. I can't imagine anybody saying you can't go get an education at least through high school, because that's part of the fabric of American, is like the value of that, not only the education, but a free public education is really, even though we're defunding it slowly in a lot of ways.
Quality doesn't matter as long as you get it.
Right. So nobody's arguing that girls shouldn't go to school here in the United States, generally speaking. And the people who do argue that, we, for the most part, acknowledge as fringe. And that's not the same case for climate advocacy. So
true.
That's still a much more controversial topic. So that's why we see Greta Thunberg get a lot more flack.
Right. And also, I think it's like something so simple as education, whereas, as you were pointing out, global warming, climate change has a lot more pieces to it than reading.
One has a solution and one has many, many complex solutions that no one can agree on.
And over here, of course, we're still arguing if climate change even exists, depending on what political party or what part of the spectrum. But I would say that like education over here is a little challenging though, because if you're from a certain racial background, there has been a fight to get access to education, to get access to quality education, to get access to teachers. There's still huge disparities based off of race and socioeconomic status that, we take for granted. I remember just hearing a book about a poem about, I forgot my pencil. I don't know if you heard it. The little boy said, I woke myself up because I didn't have an alarm clock. I got me and my brother dressed. We got our clothes out the dirty clothes because we didn't have any clean clothes. We walked to school. We got to school on time, but I got yelled at because I didn't have a pencil. And, for me, I think that, it is a challenge because, I have an African-American son, I'm an African-American woman, and I want my son to have a quality education. But there are still some places where I go where I have to fight with teachers who see him before they see what he can do, and they prejudge him. And I mean, even for myself, I went to high school, I had honors English, and they put me in these remedial classes, and we had to go and fight the counselor. And I mean, that's always been, a struggle. And so while we do have access to education, I think we have to fight for that. I mean, at Youngstown State, we're not graduating our students of color nearly as much as we should. So while we have it, I think some people do take it for granted over here. And I think that others are still struggling to maintain or to get that education or the educational quality that should be promised to everybody, but it's still in 2020 only given to some.
Right. It
And
seems to be failing.
Building off of that, we also put the responsibility on Black and brown folks, especially Black and brown girls like Malala, to save their respective countries through education, that we don't put that sort of responsibility on white folks, especially white girls. It's like, my education was not, my being educated is not like, oh, well, then I'm expected to, start a business and save my country and have to make all the decisions for it because I got that education. It was just like, oh, you got your education. Okay, well, next step. Whereas we put this responsibility because it's like, oh, you had to fight so hard to get an education. Therefore, you need to save the countries from getting that.
Yeah, you need to make it. Yeah, you need to make it worth it that you were able to get it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, and in the meantime, here we have people who brag about never reading a book after high school. Like,
right. And my education only gets me so far, right? Like it doesn't earn me more money. It doesn't put me higher up on the economic status. It won't get me on CEO boards. Like there's still a glass ceiling. Like I can have a PhD, but in terms of, where my advancement will be, what my income will be, there are still limits in terms of how far that education will get me.
Yet there's still, lots of swaths of the country depending on Black women to save us.
Star, did you want to weigh in?
I was just going to say, Kimberly on Facebook says that there's people that have so many other struggles just to get through the day that education isn't the first on the list. Making sure basic needs are met for all kids is the first step to everyone having a chance at furthering education.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate Malala's argument in terms of like, you give a kid a pen, they can change the world, or give a kid a book and pen and paper, they can, and it's like, yeah, but food is important too. And they can't write their way into food necessarily. So
yeah, there were a lot of times that she was speaking with like dignitaries and whatnot, and she would ask them about girls' education, like, what are you going to do to address this problem? And I remember that, I can't remember who she was talking to, but he said, your area has a lot of issues right now. Like there's a lot that you guys need help with. And, I think she's making a really good point fighting to get education, but at the same time, like, yeah, the people in charge are trying to get people food and, shelter and things just to help people live. Yeah. So I think there is definitely a hierarchy of needs. And, you got to pay attention to that, but that doesn't mean I think that she should stop advocating for education, because it's definitely a big piece to the puzzle of things.
I think education is definitely the basis. And what we've done in America is we've kind of put some of those into the institution. So I know with the virtual schools, a lot of people were concerned about the school districts that offer free lunch and free breakfast and offer social services to students, that they wouldn't be able to access those from being at home. And so I think that part of having an institution or an educational model is to try to address some of those challenges. I live in Akron, and LeBron James has the I Promise School. And the one thing that I admire about that school is that he reached, instead of going for a charter school for the high achieving children, like a lot of people want to start schools for, his school is for at-risk youth. It's based off of an Akron Public School model, so it's not like separate. All Akron Public School kids they get free lunch, they get free breakfast. He has a food pantry, his school has also offers GED training for the parents. He has a food pantry, and now he just opened a whole I Promise village for homeless families and transitional families in housing. And so here's a model based off of a public school system to kind of address all these other needs. Because every time he would do something, first he just had the I Promise kids, and they'll never go to college. So then he partnered with Akron and Kent. And then they were like, well, what about parents that can't help with education? So then he offers, every time they said, do this. And I think that education is key, but also the institutions that we send our kids to, if they could help to provide some of these basic needs and trainings, you know, even if Pakistan, if they, I mean, I'm not sure their structure, but looking into what are the needs and what could those institutions do to help meet those basic needs.
Would love to see LeBron James and Malala Yousafzai in the same room and see what they talk about. I would love to be a fly on the wall for that.
About the NBA finals, we should have some time.
That'd be fantastic. It is 7:45. Does anybody have any final thoughts before we start wrapping this up? Because I want to be respectful of everybody's time.
I would like to ask everyone, as a parent, could you encourage your child to speak out and put them in harm's way? Or could you yourself be that brave?
I don't think I could do either. I would be like, let's just shut up and stay inside, because this is not the time to be opening our mouths and endangering our family. And like I said, even, you know, her as a 15-year-old, I feel like is more of an adult than I am. Like, she just has a great perspective on, well, I mean, at least a strong perspective, you know, and she knows what she wants to do. And I didn't. As a 15-year-old, there's no way that I would, you know, make a fuss about any of it, I guess. I mean, I loved school, but no. The answer is no.
I only have hypothetical children, but I also have a lot of privilege insulating me. So I don't think I fully understand what it is to live in danger or in fear of your life. So I would probably, in an idealistic way, encourage everybody to do whatever they could to affect change in their situation. But I also can walk in my neighborhood without fear. I can walk in the neighborhood alone at all times of the day, and I can wear almost anything I want without repercussion. So those are all factors into what I think I can do, and what I end up doing is very different. But I can only imagine the kinds of situations that they have to deal with.
I mean, knowing that there's machine gun nests on top of houses, that would shut me up real quick.
Yeah.
Dr. Jackson?
This is hard, because I remember hearing a quote that said, if you're not willing to die for something, you haven't really lived.
Right.
And I grew up with a grandfather who was in the civil rights movement in Youngstown, whose house was bombed. He got the first Black firefighter hired in the city of Youngstown, first Black person on the school board. I have one child, a 7-year-old son, and he's my only child. And his life means the world to me. But I also know that it's not about your quantity, it's about your quality of life. And so if we have to continue to fight for civil rights or equal rights so that he can live a quality of life, so that I don't have to continue to give him the talk of how he can walk down the street and where he can go, and tell him that, you know, you don't get to play with toy guns in the park, honey, because the cops will shoot you in 2 seconds like Tamir Rice, you know, then that's my reality. Is I live for fear for my child's life every single day. So if he wanted to speak out, I would be proud of that. And if our greatest leaders were gunned down, right? Martin Luther King was shot dead. Malcolm X was shot dead, you know? So, and they've got statues and everything. And so if he's fighting for a cause so that somebody else can to be great, I was taught somebody has to fight that fight, and I'm not really the one to be quiet. So I would encourage it. I would be fearful. I'll be out there with them, because, you know, this is the world, this is our reality, and this is the world I brought them into. And so we're here to try to make it better.
And Dr. Feldbaum?
I could see myself doing more writing that was gonna rile people or instigate problems that way, but I can't see myself necessarily taking to the front lines, like leading a cause. Yet I would definitely be behind Clayton and Krishana if they took up a cause.
You would be
So
there.
that's, I don't
That's a
have
good point. It would be
Star.
easier to be behind the lines.
Star, would you answer your own question?
I think I would like to say that I would stand up and let my voice be heard, but I'm going to be honest, I don't know what I would do unless I was in that situation. As far as my children, I would probably more likely do it myself. I would worry too much about them doing it, honestly. Barbara on Facebook says that she said that they were very deep in their faith, so they deeply prayed for protection and believed. So the danger was something that they just accepted on their faith, which is true.
Actually, that relates to one of the quotes in the book that stuck with me the most that she said, and it was after she was receiving threats from the Taliban that they were going to kill her. And she said, I actually wrote it down, but she said, "It seemed to me that everyone knows they will die one day. My feeling was nobody can stop death. It doesn't matter if it comes from a Talib or from cancer. So I should do whatever I want to do." And to me, that's a fantastic way to look at life. And it's a way that I haven't completely grasped. You know, like as a 30-year-old, that's a hard thing to just accept and go with, and just know this is what I'm meant to do and this is what I need to say no matter what.
It really kind of highlights your place in the universe in a way that it's uncomfortable to think about sometimes.
Right.
She said she would do it again.
Yeah.
Strong woman.
Well, I wonder what she's going to do now that she's graduated. I'm very interested to see where her future takes her. So,
To YSU.
yeah,
There you go.
there's still a spot on moot court for you, Malala, if you wanted to come. I'm sure they'll sneak you in there somehow.
Because she is still in Britain, right?
I
Yes.
believe so.
Well, if she went to Oxford.
I believe her family is relocated to Birmingham in a somewhat permanent way. But any other thoughts or final remarks or questions? Anything from Facebook, Star, that we didn't address, or did we get?
I think we got most of it.
Very good.
I wanted to recommend, if you haven't watched her interview with David Letterman on Netflix, it's really, I thought it was really good. She talks about the Pashtun hospitality. And in terms of another book to recommend, if you like I Am Malala and you want something more academic, Forging the Educated Girl by Shalina Koja Mulji. She talks about how educational reform and development campaigns in India and Pakistan have happened time and time again, and even how some people, especially some girls in Pakistan, resent the idea of Malala, though, you know, they're for public education, and it has to do with the Western caricature of Malala having taken over so much that they don't, you know, they would have to read I Am Malala in order to get like, oh, she's not just a pawn of the Western world. She actually legitimately believes in education.
That's a good point, because now she's kind of, that's the problem with celebrity, is it kind of gets weaponized against you in a lot of ways. And I feel like that's probably happening to her to some extent, and Greta Thunberg as well. And anybody who's making a difference is vilified for being well known in some regards.
Because even she said at the end of the book that people were saying things against her now in her Pakistan.
I do want to point out, though, you can tell we're a whole bunch of readers because none of us can pronounce things when we read them. We could probably spell all these names, but none of us can say anything. We're just engaged in the page.
Yeah.
And I apologize.
Not the only one.
She said she wanted to go back to Pakistan one day, so it'll be interesting if she's ever able to return.
Well, her initial description of the Swamp Valley, I'm thinking like, this sounds really good. She says it's a resort town. I'm like, huh.
Let me
But
check-
then it's
yeah.
like, oh no, it all exploded in Taliban. It's like, okay, never mind.
It still seems like it would be a beautiful place to visit.
Yeah,
I imagine you can only get there under certain circumstances right now, and it's probably not the best idea. Especially, I mean,
Pandemic.
nobody's traveling right now anyway,
Yeah.
so we'll plan a vacation for there in the future. My worry is that Malala Yousafzai becomes a future Benazir Bhutto, and as admirable as that woman was, she suffered a tragic end for it. But
Right.
and that was a parallel that kept coming up because she said somebody gave her the scarf, the Benazir Bhutto's children gave her a scarf and stuff like that, and it just makes me worried. I hope that's not foreshadowing.
Agreed.
But once again, thank you everybody for joining us. It's 7:55, so I'm gonna go ahead and draw this conversation to a close if that's all right with everybody.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure talking to both of you. I'm so glad you were able to join us. Shall we introduce next month's pick before it's too late?
Sure. Our next book club is Tuesday, October 27th, again at 7 on Facebook Live. Our book is All Are Wrong Todays by Elon Mastai, and it is a sort of sci-fi alternate universe time travel kind of adventure with a lot of ethical questions thrown in there.
Should be exciting.
Yes.
So I have the paperback and Star has the hardcover if you're wondering why our covers are different. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next month. And special thanks to Dr. Feldbaum and Dr. Jackson. And maybe we'll audit your classes or something soon.
Absolutely.
It's
You've
on
been warned.
Zoom.
Right. We'll just give you the link.
Yeah.
Shall we do the
Bye.
wave at the end of every Zoom meeting?